So California lawmakers may have just started the trend of permanently getting rid of diesel vehicles in the near future, and here's what it looks like. California regulators on Friday voted to ban the sale of new diesel big rigs by 2036 and require all trucks to be zero emissions by 2042. And they will be the first in the world to require new commercial trucks to be electric. Down here, the earliest deadline is for drayage trucks, which carry cargo to and from major ports, which must be converted to electric models by 2035. While new sales in 2024 must be zero emission. Vehicles like garbage trucks and school buses must be zero emissions by 2027. This is an absolutely horrible law that we are not even close to ready for. I think it's another example of how lawmakers just have no idea what actually goes on with trucking companies and are probably relying off of the executives at companies that have 15,000 trucks and don't actually know how trucks operate on a day-to-day basis and what goes into it. Pushing this environmental justice is just adding tons of cost to the way that trucking companies operate. That adds cost to the rest of the population as an indirect tax. Representatives in Congress don't actually want to tax the general population so they get elected, so instead they make companies, and especially trucking companies, pay all these extra bills like Connecticut highway use tax, 2290s, federal excise tax, extra money for registrations, 99 cents a gallon for tax on diesel in Pennsylvania. And anyone, if you're in the industry, you know the list goes on and on and on about all these little fees you have to pay to the government. So please watch until the end, because I'm going to make an argument here that the government just does this to look good without taking into account the entire picture, and making laws to force the economy to change never works. This video here, Smart Trucking, goes into how the EPA has been jamming regulations down the throat of the industry that is and he's like a super trucker, so he kind of goes into how bad it's been on the trucks themselves.
Funding, the more they made it happen. So all of a sudden you've got all these engine manufacturers trying to figure out how to redesign these engines so they don't exhale. And it was an engineering disaster because it affected the way the truck engine worked. But these manufacturers were mandated to this. So by 2007, engine manufacturers were really feeling the pinch. They thought they had a system that was going to work for them using a diesel particulate filter and DEF fluid and this type of thing. They thought they had an engineering system figured out, but the problem was that the system made the truck engines unreliable because they couldn't inhale. They were collecting all this junk in this particulate filter. Didn't know how to get rid of it. They try to burn it off with a regen system. They're trying to cut down on the stack smoke past that filter by shooting DEF fluid or urea onto the smoke or whatever you want to call it, sending it through another filter and hoping what wafts out of the stack that's left at the end of the day is acceptable for the emission standards the EPA has imposed. And truck engine reliability went into the toilet. And not only that, these engine manufacturers, and they all had done this, they all spent millions trying to develop systems to make these engines work under these new emission conditions. They spent millions, and a whole lot of the time they weren't satisfied with the results, no matter how much research and development they did. It just wasn't looking good because the reliability of the engine was just plummeting. And it got to the point by 2010, and the EPA had drawn a line in the sand at 2010, and that was going to be their next round. If you didn't meet the requirements by 2010, they were going to squeeze down and clamp down even more. And Caterpillar basically said, you know what? We don't think that you can make this work. They were suffering. They were like everybody else. They were suffering warranty claims. They were suffering huge downtime. They were suffering lawsuits. And Caterpillar, at that point, bowed right out because they said, you know what, this isn't a viable reality here. It's just not going to happen for us, and we're not going to waste any more time and money on it. So, and that's what happened to Caterpillar. It's affected everybody, and the engines were so unreliable there from about 2009, 2010 onwards that the truck drivers that relied on their trucks to make a living, it's funny how that works, decided they needed workaround solutions. And this really spawned the growth of glider kits and in-framing older trucks and things like that because the cost of a new truck with all this emissions equipment on had skyrocketed somewhere between an extra 10 and 20 grand on top of the price of what they'd been paying for before. In the meantime, the EPA had also mandated that they change the fuel quality. So all of a sudden, instead of making diesel fuel with oil, we're making diesel fuel with corn and soybeans and everything else, which was great for the farmers, but it was not great for the transportation industry because that stuff was unreliable. It gelled. It still does. They still have issues with it. And the filters plug, the engine shut down. So the whole emissions thing.
They also reduced the sulfur content in the fuel, which used to lubricate the fuel injectors, which would help the fuel economy of the truck and kind of keep the engine clean, keep the engine healthy. But they got rid of that too. And yes, I used to sell diesel, so I know that biofuel is something that almost nobody is interested in just because of how bad it is for the engine.
Has been really destructive. It's been devastating for the trucking industry. But they show no signs of backing off. I think the whole thing was poorly implemented. I think they rushed it. I think if they'd given us, 50 or 75 years to develop the technology, we would have gotten there. But instead, they crammed it down our throats with these deadlines. But when these emission standards had to be met, and it devastated the industry.
So he's 100% right. You should check out that guy's channel at Smart Trucking. Really like that guy. So basically, the EPA is forcing engine manufacturers to add all these additional parts like DPF system, filters, different fuel, diesel exhaust fluid system that makes the truck $10,000, $20,000 more expensive, and in my opinion reduces the lifespan of that truck from 20 years that you might have a truck from like 1988 to a 5-year lifespan and sometimes a 3-year lifespan. Like I have trucks from 2021, these Peterbilt 579s that just like go down constantly. And I've got trucks from 2019 that just don't run anymore or go down every single time for the diesel exhaust fluid system if they run more than like 100 miles in a day. All these systems were implemented way too early before it actually worked on the trucks. And none of the other outside factors were actually factored in, like the truck's lifespan or increased cost of goods. All the EPA cared about was, fulfilling their seats, fulfilling their funding, and claiming to have made a positive change. This new regulation, I feel like, is the same thing where we are implementing laws like we do not even have electric trucks on the road. And they also mention hydrogen trucks as something that we want to use as well. Natural gas trucks and hydrogen trucks are horrible. Anyone who knows someone who drives one of these trucks, they do not run. They break down constantly. They're horrible. And the fact that we're creating a law that mandates electric trucks when we're not even using them is crazy. So just like all these systems that we were forced to implement onto diesel trucks, I think that this will turn out far worse than expected. And I think that electric trucks, based on a lot of evidence, are going to be a lot worse for the environment than what we currently use. So the batteries on these electric trucks are extremely heavy. So basically for every 50 miles of range, you're going to need 100 kilowatts of energy, which now weighs 1,375 pounds. Now they don't show it here, but that would mean that for a truck that you want to have a 500 mile range on, which most trucks in the country need, you would need a battery that weighs 15,000 pounds. This is like the entire weight of the truck. And for all these batteries, this is 15,000 pounds of primarily nickel, cobalt, and lithium that are mined very poorly in other countries, but we still purchase everything from them, so we look fine and dandy in the United States while actually increasing tons of pollution in the pursuit of these minerals. So according to Google, there are 4.06 million semi-trucks operating in the United States as of 2021. So basically some simple math here. If we've got 4 million trucks and each truck needs 13,750 pounds of battery, and the average lifespan of these batteries is 5 years, and to implement this plan in the United States, we would need over 11 billion pounds of the battery material to actually run these trucks like this every single year. So let's see where the moral environmentalists are getting all of their cobalt, nickel, and lithium. So here's an example of a very environmentally friendly cobalt mine in the Congo. So about 70% of the cobalt comes from the Congo in similar conditions to this, and it results in having tons of metals in the water and affecting pregnant women, but it's good for electric trucks. Or this mine in Baotao, China, that produces 20 pounds of toxic waste for every pound of rare earth mineral that they produce in this form here. So even if electric trucks work exactly as planned, it will still produce tons and tons of pollution in the pursuit of getting this 11 billion pounds of rare earth minerals just in the United States every year. My argument essentially is that with all this being said, is that the government shouldn't make decisions that the market should make. We should wait until the technology is actually ready to then implement the solutions, but the technology is not ready to do so, and it's only going to make things worse. For instance, California and New York are offering $80,000 to $240,000 of incentives for purchasing an electric truck, which is worth $500,000 to purchase in the first place. We are just not ready. If the truck cost $500,000 and the batteries go bad every 3 to 5 years, the cost of transportation is going to be insane, let alone from the cost of creating all the electric charging stations. I just think that this is going to be similar to the DEF solution, the DPF, all these different systems that make trucking way worse, and probably still worse for the environment in terms of reducing the amount of time that these trucks can be on the road, is not the right thing to do. And I think it's a selfish thing to do for the government to posture like they're trying to save the world, when in reality they're not doing their research. They don't know what actually goes into trucking. They don't know what actually goes into the mineral gathering for these materials. And they just want to post a story on ABC News that says, oh, we're going electric, all the buses are going to be electric. It's just truly selfish. I mean, to have a $500,000 truck is insane. Like right now, your truck might be $100,000, your trailer might be $40,000, and the product is probably worth $100,000, totaling at $260 roughly $1,000. With the truck being worth $500,000 for insurance, instead of insuring a $260,000 truck, you are now insuring a $750,000 asset when you combine the goods as well as the trailer. So insurance is going to cost far more money, and it's an unknown. We're just not ready. So don't make laws and don't act like you're going to change something if we're not even close to ready. To be honest, I'm just tired of the lying that is being done to the people when we decide not to tax things directly, when we decide to raise tolls on Class 8 vehicles, when we decide to raise diesel tax, or when we decide to raise all these other costs or force environmental policies. It's never told to the people what it's actually going to cost them. And if we forcibly implement electric trucks, which I do not think will become less expensive because the rare earth materials will be worth far more money if they're in that high of demand, 4 million trucks or 1 million trucks a year of production, it is going to add far too much cost to actually operate a trucking company. But they're going to have to operate, so it's basically just going to be way more expensive for everyone to get their goods because the liability has been tripled because of the value of the truck. The truck's lifespan will be much, much shorter than it used to be. And with the increasing price of these rare minerals, it's just going to be more and more expensive. So that's my point. It's getting pretty late here. I'm starting to lose my mental acuity a little bit. But I think that this is posturing from the government to look good without actual research or care for what goes well. I think that regardless of what I think, it's just going to continue. So as truckers, as trucking companies, we're going to have to adapt to what they're throwing at us. But it was kind of interesting, actually, taking the time to learn this. I mean, it's almost like 2 a.m. here. Worked on this one for a while, did a bunch of research. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's stuff you could probably do with the incentives in California and New York that come from purchasing the fuel truck. It's like you could get $120,000 in cash and then finance out the truck and potentially cash flow positive from getting a truck. But it also has to work, if that makes sense. If anything doesn't make sense, I'll respond to almost every single comment. I could probably explain it better in a little bit of writing if you've got a question. And I enjoyed making this video. And if anyone's still listening, thank you so much. Like and subscribe, and let me know what you think.